James Carter didn't flinch. The social worker stared at him, stunned, but he was firm. These girls needed someone, and for the first time in years, James felt a purpose. How did it come to this? How did a quiet, no-nonsense cop end up on the verge of adopting 7 black girls in a town resistant to change? Let's rewind. Officer James Carter's life revolved around routine. Every morning, he'd sip his black coffee on the porch of his modest home in the Brooksville, a small southern town where the past seemed to linger in the air. The streets were lined with aging oak trees, and the townsfolk knew everyone's business. James had served as a cop here for over 20 years. The people respected him, but they also kept their distance. After all, James wasn't the warm, approachable type. Since his wife, Emma, had passed 5 years ago, James had thrown himself into his work. His home was now eerily quiet, filled with the echoes of what could have been. Emma had always dreamed of a big family, but life had other plans. One crisp autumn evening, James was patrolling Main Street when his radio crackled to life. Unit 24, we've got a call from 127 Maple Avenue. Possible child abandonment. Neighbors heard crying. James's heart sank. Maple Avenue wasn't the nicest part of town, and cases like these rarely ended well. He flicked on his lights and headed toward the address. The house was barely standing. A sagging roof, boarded windows, and a front yard overrun with weeds. James parked, adjusted his belt, and approached the front door. The faint sound of sobbing filtered through the cracks. He knocked firmly. "Police? Anyone home?" Silence, except for the crying. After a moment, James carefully turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The air was heavy, smelling of mildew and neglect. In the dim light, he saw them. 7 girls, huddled together on a worn-out couch, their eyes, wide with fear, locked onto him. "Hey, it's okay," James said gently, lowering himself to their level. "I'm Officer Carter. I'm here to help." The oldest girl, around 16, stepped forward. Her shoulders were squared, but her voice trembled. "We've been waiting for Mama and Daddy. They went out, but they didn't come back." James's chest tightened. He spoke softly. "How long have you been here alone?" 3 days, she whispered, her voice cracking. James radioed for backup, feeling a surge of protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. As he waited for social services to arrive, he learned their names. Aisha, Naomi, Kendra, Talia, Amani, Maya, and little Zoe. Each of their faces told a story of resilience and fear. They clung to one another like their lives depended on it. When the social worker arrived, James's heart broke as she explained the inevitable. "We'll have to separate them. Finding a home that can take all 7 is impossible." The girl's terrified eyes met James's, and before he could stop himself, he spoke. "What if I take them?" The room fell silent. The social worker blinked in disbelief. "Officer Carter, are you serious? You know what you're saying, right? 7 kids?" James nodded, his voice firm. "They've lost everything. They shouldn't lose each other too. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them together." The social worker hesitated, but saw the determination in his eyes. "This won't be easy. You'll need to meet specific criteria, undergo evaluations." "I'll do it," James interrupted. He glanced at the girls, who were now staring at him with a mix of hope and disbelief. "We'll make it work." As the girls were escorted to a temporary shelter for the night, James felt a new sense of purpose ignite within him. His quiet, lonely life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. James faces the daunting task of proving he's capable of adopting 7 children, but is he truly ready for the challenges ahead? The first few days in James Carter's home were anything but smooth. 7 pairs of eyes watched his every move, filled with caution and doubt. The girls barely spoke to him, sticking close to each other like their lives depended on it. James quickly realized he had walked into a situation far more complicated than he had anticipated. Aisha was the unofficial leader, her protective instincts honed from years of looking out for her sisters. She was tall for her age, with sharp eyes that rarely softened. "If you think you can just replace our parents, you're wrong," she said one evening, her tone cold and defensive. "I'm not here to replace anyone," James replied evenly, though her words stung. "I'm here to make sure you all stay together." Aisha's glare lingered for a moment before she turned her back on him. She wasn't ready to trust, not yet. Naomi spent most of her time sketching in an old notebook she'd brought from the shelter. She barely spoke, but James often found her sitting by the window, drawing scenes from her new surroundings. One evening, he peeked over her shoulder. "That's really good," he said, pointing to a sketch of the house. Naomi quickly closed the notebook and mumbled, "Thanks," before retreating to her room. Kendra was a handful. Always testing boundaries, she challenged James at every turn. "I'm not cleaning up after anyone," she declared when James asked for help with chores. "We all pitch in here," James replied, trying to keep his patience. "You're not my dad. You can't tell me what to do," she snapped, arms crossed defiantly. James sighed. "Maybe not, but I'm responsible for you now. We're a team." Kendra rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath as she stomped off. Talia, on the other hand, did her best to keep the peace. Whenever tensions flared between her sisters or with James, she was the first to step in. "Come on, Kendra," she said after one argument. "Let's just help out. It's not a big deal." She often tried to mediate, offering quiet reassurances to her younger siblings. "It'll get better," she'd whisper, though James could see the worry in her eyes. Imani was full of questions, her curiosity boundless. "Why do you have so many coffee mugs?" she asked one morning, holding up a chipped cup. James chuckled. "I guess I just like coffee." "Can I try some?" she asked, grinning mischievously. "Not a chance," James replied with a smile. Imani's playful nature was a rare bright spot in the tense household, but even she had her moments of uncertainty. Maya clung to Talia, her big eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar house. She rarely spoke, often hiding behind her sisters when James was near. One night, during a thunderstorm, James found her curled up in the hallway, clutching a blanket. "Everything okay, Maya?" he asked gently. She nodded but didn't say a word. James sat down nearby, giving her space but letting her know he was there. Zoe was the youngest and the most oblivious to the weight of their situation. She toddled around the house, giggling and playing with whatever she could find. But even Zoe had her moments. One day, she tugged at James's pant leg and said, "When's Mama coming back?" James knelt down, his heart aching. "Zoe, your Mama and Daddy aren't coming back, but I'm here now, okay?" Zoe stared at him for a moment, then hugged his neck tightly. It was the first time any of the girls had shown him affection, and it caught him off guard. Brooksville was a small town, and word spread quickly. People whispered behind James's back, their disapproval evident in their stares. "Carter's got 7 black kids now? What's he thinking?" Mrs. Hensley, the nosy neighbor, muttered to another woman at the grocery store. James felt the weight of their judgment but brushed it off. He had made his choice, and he wasn't about to let the town's opinions change that. However, the girls weren't immune to the town's attitudes. At school, they faced questions and sideways glances. Aisha came home one day, slamming her backpack on the floor. "They think it's weird," she said, her voice shaking, "that we live with you." James sat down beside her. "What people think doesn't matter, Aisha. What matters is that you're safe and together." She didn't respond, but James hoped his words made an impact. James quickly realized he was out of his depth. He'd never raised kids, let alone 7 girls with different personalities and needs. One morning, he attempted to braid Maya's hair. After several failed tries and a few frustrated tears, from both of them, Talia stepped in. "Here, let me," she said, expertly weaving Maya's hair into neat braids. James watched, feeling a mix of admiration and helplessness. "Thanks, Talia. Guess I've got a lot to learn." Another time he tried cooking dinner, a simple spaghetti dish. The result was a lumpy, overcooked mess. Kendra poked at her plate and smirked. "This is gross." James laughed despite himself. "Yeah, I'll order pizza next time." Slowly but surely, the household found its rhythm. The girls began to open up, and James started to learn what each of them needed. One evening, after an especially chaotic day, James found Naomi sketching on the porch. "What you working on?" he asked. She hesitated before handing him the notebook. Inside was a drawing of all 7 girls sitting together at the dining table. "And that's you," she said, pointing to a figure at the head of the table. James felt a lump in his throat. "Thanks, Naomi. This means a lot." It was a small moment, but it felt like a breakthrough. Just as the family begins to find their footing, a new challenge arises, one that will test their fragile bond and James's commitment to keeping them together. The mornings in James's house were still chaotic, but they had started to find their rhythm. Breakfast usually began with Talia trying to keep peace while Zoe giggled and clung to her leg, and Kendra rolled her eyes at James's attempts to scramble eggs without burning them. Little by little, the tension that had filled the air during those first few days was easing, though James knew he had a long way to go. One Saturday, James decided it was time to tackle something he'd been dreading: doing the girls' hair. He had watched Talia braid Maya's hair effortlessly, her fingers moving quickly and skillfully, and thought, how hard can it be? He was about to find out. "All right, who's up first?" he asked, holding a comb and a pack of hair ties. The room went silent as the girls exchanged skeptical looks. Finally, Maya shyly stepped forward. "Okay, sweetheart," James said, patting the chair. "Let's see what we can do." It started off badly. James combed too hard, and Maya winced. Sorry," he muttered, adjusting his grip. He attempted a braid, but it quickly unraveled, leaving Maya's hair sticking out in awkward clumps. After several failed attempts, Zoe, sitting nearby with her thumb in her mouth, burst into laughter. James sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, I admit it. I'm terrible at this." Maya giggled, her initial shyness fading. "It's okay, Daddy. You're trying." James froze for a moment. Daddy. It was the first time any of the girls had called him that. His heart swelled, and he gave her a warm smile. "Thanks, kiddo." Later that day, James called Talia into the kitchen. "Think you could give me some lessons?" he asked. Talia tilted her head, curious. "Lessons?" "Yeah, you know. Braiding. I want to get it right." Talia gave him a small smile, her usually serious face softening. "Okay, but you have to promise not to give up." "Deal," James said. Over the next few days, under Talia's watchful eye, he practiced. By the end of the week, he had successfully braided Maya's hair, albeit a bit crookedly. The house erupted in applause when Maya proudly showed off her new braids at dinner. The small victories didn't stop there. James had learned early on that cooking was another area where he fell short. His initial attempts were met with varying degrees of horror: burnt toast, undercooked chicken, and the infamous spaghetti incident. But he was determined to improve. He started watching cooking videos late at night after the girls had gone to bed. He scribbled down recipes and practiced making their favorite meals. It wasn't long before the girls noticed. One evening, James served up fried chicken and collard greens, dishes he knew reminded them of home. The room went quiet as they took their first bites. This is good," Aisha said, her tone reluctant but impressed. "Yeah, Dad, this is actually good," Imani added, her mouth full. James beamed. "Don't sound so surprised." The girls laughed, and for the first time dinner felt like a real family gathering. The real turning point came at school. One afternoon, James received a call from the principal, asking him to come in immediately. When he arrived, he found Aisha and Kendra sitting in the office, their faces tense. A teacher stood nearby, her expression severe. "We had an incident today," the principal began, his tone grave. "There was a fight." Aisha looked down, her fists clenched while Kendra glared at the teacher. "It wasn't our fault," Kendra said sharply. "She started it." The teacher sighed. "One of the other students made a comment, and instead of ignoring it, your daughters decided to respond physically." James's eyes narrowed. "What kind of comment?" The teacher hesitated. "A racial comment." James felt his blood boil. He looked at the girls. "Are you both okay?" They nodded, though Aisha's eyes were glassy. James turned to the principal. "And what's being done about the student who made the comment?" The principal stammered, clearly caught off guard. "We're handling it, Officer Carter. But physical altercations—" "Let me be clear," James interrupted, his voice firm. "My daughters were defending themselves against hate. I won't tolerate racism being brushed aside, and I won't let them be punished for standing up for their dignity." The principal nodded, quickly backtracking. "Of course, we'll review the situation." Afterward, James took Aisha and Kendra home. On the drive, they sat in silence, the weight of the incident hanging in the air. When they arrived, James turned off the engine, but it didn't move. "I'm proud of you two," he said finally. Aisha looked at him surprised. "For getting in trouble?" "For standing up for yourselves," James said. "But next time, come to me. I'll make sure people know this family doesn't back down." Aisha nodded slowly, her tough exterior cracking just a little. "Thanks, Dad." That night, James found Naomi sitting on the porch, her sketchbook open on her lap. She didn't notice him at first, absorbed in her drawing. James sat down quietly beside her. "Rough day?" he asked. Naomi shrugged. "It's just, people don't get it. They stare at us, talk about us like we're different." James nodded, understanding her frustration. "They're scared of what they don't understand, but that's their problem, not yours." Naomi glanced at him, her eyes thoughtful. "You really think that?" "I do," James said. "And you're not alone in this. We've got each other." Naomi smiled faintly and handed him her sketchbook. Inside was a drawing of the whole family, sitting together at the dining table, laughing and talking. James felt a lump in his throat. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice thick. Naomi shrugged again but looked pleased. "Thanks." The moment was brief, but it felt significant. Slowly, the walls the girls had built around themselves were coming down. James knew there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time he felt like they were truly becoming a family. The days in the Carter household had settled into a new kind of normal. James was starting to feel more confident in his role as a father, and the girls were beginning to trust him in ways he hadn't thought possible when they first moved in. There was laughter at the dinner table, playful teasing, and even the occasional "thanks, Dad" thrown his way. But lately, James had been feeling off. It started with small things. He would get winded climbing the stairs or feel lightheaded after bending down to tie Zoe's shoes. He chalked it up to being out of shape. After all, he wasn't getting any younger, and 7 kids were a lot to keep up with. But then came the headaches, sharp and sudden, that would leave him gripping the kitchen counter until they passed. One morning, as he was pouring coffee, Talia noticed him rubbing his temples. "You okay, Dad?" James forced a smile. "Just a headache, sweetheart. Nothing a little coffee won't fix." She frowned but didn't press him. James appreciated that about Talia. She was observant but never pushy. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Meanwhile, the girls had been unusually secretive, whispering in corners and giggling whenever James walked into the room. One evening, as he was tucking Zoe into bed, she blurted out, "We have a surprise for you." James raised an eyebrow. "A surprise, huh? What kind of surprise?" Zoe clamped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide. "Oops, I wasn't supposed to say anything." James chuckled. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me." The next day, the girls were more tight-lipped than ever, dodging his questions with practiced ease. Even Kendra, who loved to tease him, kept her mouth shut. James figured whatever they were planning, it was big. That weekend, the girls insisted on taking James to the park for a family picnic. They packed sandwiches, snacks, and a blanket, and James was happy to go along with it, even though he felt unusually tired that morning. The fresh air would do him good, he thought. The park was bustling with families and couples enjoying the sunny afternoon. The girls found a spot under a large oak tree, spreading out the blanket and laying out the food. Zoe ran ahead, chasing butterflies, while Aisha and Naomi helped set up. "Sit down, Dad," Talia said, patting the blanket. "We'll take care of everything." James smiled and sat, grateful for the chance to rest. The girls had even brought his favorite sandwich, turkey and Swiss with a little bit of mustard. As they ate and laughed, James felt a warmth in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged to something bigger than himself. After lunch, the girls gathered around him, their faces lit with excitement. "We have something for you," Aisha said, holding out a small box. James took the box, his brow furrowed. "What's this?" "Just open it," Kendra said, practically bouncing with anticipation. Inside the box was a watch, simple but elegant, with the words, "Thank you for being our dad," engraved on the back. James stared at it, his throat tightening. "We wanted you to know how much you mean to us," Naomi said softly. "You've done so much for us, and we love you." James blinked rapidly, his vision blurring. "Girls, His voice broke. "I don't know what to say." "Say you like it," Imani said, grinning. James chuckled, his heart full. "I love it, and I love you girls." They piled on him in a group hug, laughing and squeezing tightly. For a moment, everything felt perfect. But as the afternoon wore on, James started to feel strange. His head throbbed, and his vision blurred around the edges. He tried to ignore it, not wanting to ruin the day, but the feeling only got worse. When Zoe tugged on his arm, asking him to play tag, James stood up too quickly. The world tilted, and his legs gave out beneath him. He heard the girls shout his name as he hit the ground, the sound of their voices fading as darkness closed in around him. James lies unconscious, the girls surrounding him in panic, their perfect day shattered in an instant. James woke to the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of a monitor. His head throbbed, and his body felt heavy. As he blinked the room into focus, he saw 7 familiar faces staring at him, their eyes wide with fear and concern. Aisha was the first to speak. "Dad, you scared us," she said, her voice cracking despite her usual composure. James tried to smile, but it came out weak. "Sorry, girls. Guess I overdid it." A doctor entered, holding a clipboard and offering a reassuring smile. "Mr. Carter, it's good to see you awake. We've run some tests and found what's causing your symptoms. You have a condition called a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a heart condition, but the good news is it's treatable with medication and lifestyle changes." The room fell silent. James could see the worry etched on each of the girls' faces. "What does that mean?" Talia asked, her voice small. The doctor sat down, addressing them all. "It means James needs to take it easy for a while. He'll need to avoid stress and physical exertion, but with the right treatment, he can manage this condition and live a full life." James nodded, absorbing the information. "So, I'm not going anywhere?" "Not if we can help it," the doctor said with a smile, "but you'll have to make some changes." After the doctor left, James looked at the girls who were still processing the news. "Hey, it's going to be okay," he said softly. "I'm not giving up, and I don't want you to worry." Aisha crossed her arms, her jaw set. "We're not just going to sit around and do nothing. You've done everything for us. Now it's our turn to take care of you." The other girls nodded in agreement. Kendra spoke up next. "Yeah, you're not getting rid of us that easily." Over the next few weeks, the household dynamic shifted. The girls stepped up in ways James hadn't expected. Talia took charge of managing his medications and scheduling follow-up appointments, her natural organizational skills shining through. Naomi, ever the quiet observer, started cooking healthier meals, using recipes she found online. Even Kendra, who usually rebelled against any form of authority, began helping around the house without complaint. She cleaned, did laundry, and made sure the younger girls stayed on top of their chores. One evening, James found himself sitting on the couch with Maya and Zoe curled up on either side of him, watching a movie. He glanced around the room, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. His daughters had rallied around him without hesitation, their love and support giving him strength. But the girls weren't the only ones who noticed the change. The town, once skeptical of James's unconventional family, began to see them in a new light. Word of James's health scare spread quickly, and neighbors started offering help. One afternoon, James was surprised to see Mrs. Hensley, the nosy neighbor who had once whispered about him at the grocery store, standing on his porch with a casserole dish in hand. "I heard about your condition," she said, shifting uncomfortably. "Thought you could use a little help." James took the dish, momentarily stunned. "Thank you, Mrs. Hensley. That means a lot." She nodded, her eyes softening. "Those girls of yours, they're something special. You've done right by them, Carter." As the weeks passed, more neighbors reached out. They dropped off meals, offered to drive the girls to school or activities, and even organized a community fundraiser to help cover James's medical expenses. For the first time, James felt a sense of belonging in a town that had once kept him at arm's length. The girls thrived on the support. At school, their teachers praised their resilience, and their peers began to see them not as outsiders, but as an integral part of the community. Aisha, who had always carried the weight of protecting her sisters, found herself leaning on her new support system. She joined the student council and started advocating for more inclusive school policies. One evening, James sat at the dining table surrounded by his daughters and a few neighbors who had stopped by to check on him. As laughter and conversation filled the room, he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with his condition. They were a family, stronger than ever, and they weren't alone. After the guests left and the younger girls were tucked into bed, Aisha lingered in the kitchen helping James with the dishes. She glanced at him, her expression serious. "Dad," she said quietly, "we're going to be okay, right?" James set down the dish he was drying and looked at her. "We're going to be more than okay," he said firmly. "We've got each other, and that's all we need." Aisha nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Good, because I'm not ready to lose you." "You won't," James promised, pulling her into a hug. "Not for a long time." That night, as James lay in bed, he reflected on how far they had come. The road ahead might still be challenging, but he knew they could face it together. The love and resilience of his daughters had given him a new lease on life, and he was determined to make the most of it. Life in the Carter household was starting to feel steady again. The girls were thriving, James was managing his health, and their bond as a family was stronger than ever. But just when things seemed to be settling down, an unexpected letter arrived that would threaten to unravel everything. It was a chilly Monday morning when James found the envelope in the mailbox. The return address was from a law firm. Confused, he opened it right there on the porch. As he read the letter, his heart sank. It was from Geraldine Moore, a distant relative of the girl's late mother. She claimed that as a blood relative, she had the right to custody of the children and was filing a legal petition to take them. James sat heavily on the porch steps, his hands trembling. He had never even heard of Geraldine. Where had she been when the girls were abandoned? Why was she stepping in now, after all this time? Later that evening, he gathered the girls in the living room. The younger ones were playing with toys, oblivious to the tension, but Aisha immediately sensed something was wrong. "What's going on, Dad?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. James took a deep breath. "I got a letter today. It's from someone claiming to be a relative of your mom. She's trying to take you girls away." The room fell silent. Naomi clutched her sketchbook tighter while Kendra shot to her feet. "What? She can't do that. She doesn't even know us." Aisha's face hardened. "We're not going anywhere. We belong here." "I know," James said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him, "but we have to fight this in court." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers and preparing for the upcoming court battle. The girls were scared, but they stuck together, determined to stay as a family. One evening, James found Aisha sitting alone on the porch, staring into the distance. "You okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Why now? Why is she doing this?" James wished he had an answer. "I don't know, but what I do know is that we fought for this family before and will fight again. We're not giving up." Aisha nodded, her jaw set. "Neither am I." As the court date approached, the community that had once been skeptical of James and the girls rallied around them. Letters of support poured in from neighbors, teachers, and friends, all vouching for the strong bond James had built with the girls. Even Mrs. Hensley, the once curious neighbor, organized a petition. On the day of the hearing, James and the girls walked into the courtroom together, their heads held high. Geraldine was there, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, flanked by her attorney. She glanced at the girls, but they avoided her gaze. The judge began by hearing Geraldine's case. Her lawyer argued that, as a blood relative, Geraldine had a right to custody and could provide a stable home. Geraldine spoke about her concern for the girls' well-being and claimed she was only stepping in now because she had recently learned of their situation. When it was James's turn, his lawyer presented evidence of the life he had built for the girls: school reports, community testimonials, even photos of family moments. James spoke from the heart, describing how each of the girls had grown and thrived in his care. Finally, the girls were allowed to speak. One by one, they stood before the judge, their voices strong despite their fear. "We've been through a lot," Aisha said, her gaze unwavering. "But we've built a life here with James. He's our dad, and we don't want to lose him." Kendra added, "She doesn't know us. She wasn't there when we needed help. James was." Even little Zoe, with her tiny voice, said, "I love my daddy. I want to stay." The judge listened carefully, his expression neutral but attentive. When the testimonies were over, he announced that he needed time to review the case and would deliver his verdict in a few days. As they left the courtroom, the weight of uncertainty hung heavily over them. They had done everything they could, but now their fate was out of their hands. The girls were quiet on the ride home. James could feel their fear, and it mirrored his own. That night, as they sat around the dinner table, he tried to lighten the mood. "No matter what happens," he said, "we're a family, and no one can take that away from us." The girls nodded, but the tension remained. A few days later, the phone rang. It was James's lawyer, and his heart raced as he answered. After a brief conversation, he hung up and turned to the girls, who were anxiously watching him. "Well?" Aisha asked, her voice tight. James smiled, his eyes shining. "We won. The judge ruled in our favor." The room erupted in cheers and tears. The girls rushed to hug him, their relief palpable. They had fought for their family, and they had won. That night, as they sat together on the couch, James felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their bond had been tested, but it had only grown stronger. They were more than a family. They were unbreakable. The courtroom was packed. The quiet hum of whispers filled the air as James, the girls, and their lawyer walked in. James felt the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders, but he glanced at his daughters and saw the determination in their eyes. They were ready to fight. The judge, an older man with a stern but fair demeanor, entered, and the room fell silent. He looked over his notes, then addressed the court. "This case concerns the custody of 7 minors and will determine where they will live moving forward. Let's begin." Geraldine's lawyer was the first to speak, outlining why she believed her client, as a blood relative, was the rightful guardian. "Mrs. Moore is family, Your Honor. She can provide a stable home and ensure the girls remain connected to their heritage." Geraldine took the stand next. She spoke of her deep concern for the girls and how she believed it was her duty to step in now that she was aware of their situation. "I want what's best for them," she said, her voice steady but lacking genuine warmth. "Family belongs with family." When it was James's turn, his lawyer began by presenting the life James had built for the girls. "Your Honor, Mr. Carter has been the sole guardian of these children for the past year. Under his care, they have thrived. He has provided them with stability, love, and a sense of belonging." James took the stand, his heart pounding. "I'm not related to these girls by blood," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But they're my family. When I found them, they were scared and alone. I made a promise to keep them together, and I intend to keep that promise." He looked directly at the judge. "These girls have been through enough. They've lost their parents, their home. They don't need more upheaval. They need to stay together. They need each other." One by one, the girls were called to testify. Aisha, the eldest, stood tall, her voice clear. "We finally found a home with James. He's the only dad we've known since our parents died. He's always been there for us." Naomi clutched her sketchbook as she spoke, her quiet voice trembling but determined. "He supports us in everything we do. He cares about what makes us happy. That's what a real dad does." Kendra's testimony was short but powerful. "She's never been there for us," she said, gesturing toward Geraldine. "James has. That's all that matters." Talia, Imani, and Maya each shared their love and gratitude for James, while little Zoe, sitting on the lawyer's lap, simply said, "I love my daddy. Please don't take him away." James's lawyer then introduced a surprise witness, Mrs. Hensley, the once nosy neighbor who had become one of their strongest supporters. She walked to the stand with a confidence that surprised even James. "At first, I wasn't sure about all this," she admitted, glancing at James. "But I've watched this man raise these girls with more love and dedication than anyone I've ever seen. They've become a part of our community, and we're better for it." The room was silent as she concluded, "Blood doesn't make a family. Love does." Just when it seemed like everything had been said, James's lawyer approached the bench with a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, we have one more piece of evidence. This is a letter written by the girl's late mother, Caroline Moore, shortly before her passing. It was recently discovered among her belongings." The judge took the letter, his expression unreadable as he opened it. He began to read aloud. "To whoever reads this, if something happens to me and my husband, my only wish is that my daughters stay together. They are each other's strength, and separating them would break their spirits. Please, find someone who will love them as a family, someone who will keep them together and give them the life they deserve." The letter was brief, but its impact was profound. Tears streamed down the girls' faces, and even Geraldine shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The judge folded the letter and placed it on his desk. After a long pause, he addressed the courtroom. "This is one of the most emotionally charged cases I've presided over," he began. "Family is an important bond, but as we've seen today, family is not always defined by blood." He looked at James, then at the girls. "It is clear to me that Mr. Carter has provided these children with a loving and stable home. He has upheld their late mother's wishes and has shown unwavering dedication to their well-being." The judge turned to Geraldine. "While I acknowledge your connection as a relative, the court's primary concern is the best interest of the children, and their best interest is to remain with the man they consider their father." A collective breath was released as the judge delivered his final verdict. "Custody will remain with Mr. Carter." The courtroom erupted into quiet murmurs. Geraldine looked stunned, but she nodded respectfully. James, overwhelmed with relief, pulled his daughters into a tight embrace. As they left the courtroom, the girls' faces were a mix of tears and smiles. Outside, a small group of neighbors had gathered to show their support. They cheered as the family stepped into the sunlight, united and victorious. That night, back at home, the girls presented James with a framed copy of their mother's letter, a symbol of the bond that had brought them together. James hung it in the living room, a constant reminder of the promise he had made and the family they had fought to protect. Years passed, and the Carter household changed in ways James could have never imagined. The once chaotic mornings with 7 girls scrambling for school had given way to quieter days. James had retired from the police force, his health stable thanks to a strict regimen and the girls' constant care. His life now revolved around tending his small garden, reading, and occasionally helping out at the local community center. The girls, no longer girls but young women, had all gone on to pursue their dreams. James marveled at their growth, each carving out a unique path. Aisha, the eldest, had become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping children in foster care. Naomi, the quiet artist, had turned her sketches into a successful career as an illustrator. Kendra, ever the rebel, surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, determined to fight for justice. Talia's peacemaking skills led her to a career in counseling, while Amani's playful curiosity found a home in teaching. Maya, once shy and reserved, had blossomed into a confident nurse, and little Zoe, the baby of the family, was now studying to be a veterinarian. Though their lives were busy, the girls never drifted far from home. They visited often, filling the house with laughter and memories. James cherished these moments, proud of the family they had built together. One warm summer afternoon, James was sitting on the porch, sipping lemonade and watching the neighborhood children play. He heard the sound of car doors slamming and looked up to see all 7 of his daughters walking toward him, their faces lit with excitement. "What's going on?" he asked, setting his glass down as they gathered around him. "We've been working on something," Aisha said, handing him a sleek envelope. James opened it, his brows furrowing as he read the contents. His eyes widened when he saw the bold letters at the top, the James Carter Foundation. He looked up, confused. "What is this?" "It's a foundation we started," Naomi explained, her voice soft but proud. "It's dedicated to helping foster kids stay together, just like you kept us together." "We've already got funding," Kendra added, her tone triumphant. "And we're partnering with social services to provide resources for families who want to adopt siblings." James was speechless, his hands trembling as he held the papers. "You girls did this?" Talia nodded. "We couldn't have done any of this without you, Dad. You showed us what love and family really mean." "We wanted to make sure your legacy continues," Maya said, her eyes shining with tears. "So no child has to go through what we did." Zoe climbed into his lap, just like she used to when she was little. "You're our hero, Daddy." James's vision blurred as he pulled them all into a hug, his heart overflowing. "I don't know what to say. This is the most incredible thing anyone's ever done for me." "You deserve it," Aisha said firmly. "You saved us, Dad. Now we want to help others, just like you helped us." The rest of the day was spent celebrating, reminiscing about their journey and the challenges they had overcome together. James couldn't stop smiling, his heart full as he realized the profound impact he had made on their lives. That evening, as the sun set and the house grew quiet, James sat in his favorite chair, the foundation papers still in his hands. He thought about the journey they had taken together, the fear, the struggles, and the unwavering love that had brought them here. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the girls, but for the life they had built as a family. To everyone watching, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's a powerful reminder that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and the choices we make every day. Together, we can make a difference, just like James and his daughters. Thank you for being part of this journey.